Welcome, everybody, to a Hashkafa session. How are you? Let me see if I can get your picture enlarged here. There we go. So, Ian, where are you? Looks like a prison behind you. A lot of bars. Unmute him.
How are you, Rabbi? I just got a background.
Can't believe what you see these days.
Never. You can't believe what you hear either.
Yeah. A lot of fake news. Okay. Let's spend a little time thinking about what is the nature of the Torah and the Mitzvahs. Where do they come from? What are they really? And how do they reflect God himself? Because the first word of the Ten Commandments, as we know, the word Anochi, is really an acronym for the words Anon Nafshi Ksavis Yehovis. I give you myself in writing. So before the Ten Commandments are even written, God announces what it's all about. What I'm going to write is not a shopping list. It's not a to-do list. It's me. I'm giving myself to you in writing. So the Torah and the mitzvahs that it contains are really an expression of him. So we know that the Torah existed before creation. How long before creation? If we can really ask that question. Because before creation, there was no time. So you can't say 2 weeks before creation, because there were no weeks, there was no time. What we mean is, how much deeper is the Torah rooted in God himself than God's ability to create a physical universe? What is closer or prior in his being? Because when we say before and after, or higher or lower, closer or further, what we're referring to is there is God as he is. And then there is God as he expresses himself. Now we know that when you express yourself, it can either be a true, intimate expression of who you are, or it can be just fake news. You're just saying words. It's not really you. We know that there are words that come from the heart, and there are words that are just superficial. So when we say higher, we mean more original, more essential to the being. What is the higher part of me? My thoughts or my actions? My thoughts are higher because they're closer to who I am, to what I am. My actions, well, I can do them or not do them. Somebody else can do exactly the same actions. So that's further from the essence of me. when we're speaking about God, the Torah preceded creation, meaning the Torah is really him. Creation is just an activity. We also make the same distinction between God creating the world or the motivation for creating the world. Creating the world is just an act. The motivation is obviously more personal. It would reveal more of God than creation does. In creation itself, God created in such a way that his creation would not know that it is being created, and it would not know who's creating it, which shows how external activity or actions are. My actions don't reveal me at all. And particularly with God, he creates the world and is creating the world right now, and yet we don't know it and we don't know him. So first of all, how do we know that God is creating the world right now? Didn't he create the world 5,780 years ago? In the 6 days of creation, and those 6 days are over. So why is he still creating? The logical explanation is when you make existence out of non-existence, you have to keep doing it or it won't exist. Like if you make a bowl out of clay, the bowl will exist without your making it every day. But that's because you started with clay. The clay already exists. You're only giving it a shape. When you give clay a shape, the clay can retain that shape. Clay can. Water can't. You can't make a bowl out of water, because no matter how many times you shape it, it will not maintain that shape. Why? Because it doesn't exist in the potential of water. It does exist in the potential of clay or wood or marble. So all you're doing really is changing the shape according to the capacity and the ability of the material you're working with. If the material doesn't already have that potential, you can't create something that isn't already there. God, however, created the world out of nothing. So when God said, "Let there be," what responded? Who was he talking to? God said, "Let there be," and everybody said, "Who are you talking to?" He wasn't talking to anybody because there was nothing. So God made something out of nothing, which means that if he stops making it, there is nothing. That is the true meaning of the word create. Humans don't really create. They alter. You can reshape things. You can't create something. Only God can create. So when God creates the world out of nothing, he's got to be creating it all the time, or there's nothing. So if God is creating us right now, how do we not feel it? I don't know if it's a good analogy, but when you're running a film, you watch the film, you have no idea that each frame is static. The frame doesn't move. And between one frame and another, there's a black strip. You don't know any of that. To you, it seems like it's alive. So God is creating the world every second, and we don't feel the shift from one second to the next, because we existed one moment, and then we needed to be created again the next moment. So it's like there's a black strip between a moment ago and a moment of now, and we don't see that strip. We don't feel ourselves going out of existence and coming back into existence every moment, even though that's what's happening. So we don't know that we're being created. We certainly don't know who is creating us. But that's God's most external activity. That's why we don't call him a creator. He is not a creator. That's the least of what he is. He is the creator because he did create, but he is not a creator. That's not what he does. It's not who he is. So when the Torah says that the Torah preceded creation, what do we mean by preceded? It means it is more essential of him than creation. In different words, the Gemara says that the Torah is the blueprint for creation. Obviously, the blueprint exists before the creation, before the building. The blueprint is the vision of the builder, which is, of course, higher than the building, than the constructing. How much higher? There is nothing that precedes Torah. Which means that there was never a moment or a place or a level or a condition in which Torah did not exist. As long as there was God, there was Torah. Because the Torah is him. So the Torah is as eternal as he is. The mitzvahs are as eternal as he is. So nothing preceded the Torah, and also the Torah can never end. Just as God can't end. So when we ask a question like, why does God need us to keep Shabbos? Why does he have needs? How could he have needs? The correct answer, which needs a little explaining, but the correct answer is, he doesn't need the mitzvah. He is the mitzvah. What he needs is for you to connect to him through the mitzvah. But the mitzvah is him. So when you do the mitzvah, you are connecting to him, not to his creations, not to his angels, not to his heaven, not to his paradise, to him. So there's an interesting discussion in the Gemara where the Gemara is debating, will we be doing mitzvahs after the resurrection of the dead? There's one opinion that says the mitzvahs will no longer be in force. But the Rebbe explains, there is no such a debate. No one is debating whether we're going to be keeping Shabbos in Olam Haba. Nobody is debating whether we're going to be putting on tefillin. The mitzvahs are him. How could they end? So many people believe, sadly, that the mitzvahs have a purpose, right? The mitzvahs accomplish something. Once that's accomplished, you won't need the mitzvahs anymore. That's a way of getting around the canceling of mitzvahs. Because one of the principles of the Rambam's 13 principles of faith is that the Torah will never change. So people explain it won't change, it will have completed its task and therefore not be necessary anymore. So nobody is going to dismiss, cancel, or ignore the mitzvahs. No, never. But once the mitzvahs have accomplished their purpose, then they naturally are no longer necessary. So they have been completed, not rejected. That sound a little familiar? That's Christianity. Christianity didn't cancel the mitzvahs, didn't reject the mitzvahs. The mitzvahs had its purpose, it served its purpose, and it's no longer necessary. But that's not acceptable. The reason we know that the mitzvahs will never be rejected or ended or canceled is because they are him. And just as he can't end, the mitzvahs can't end. So even the argument that they will have served their purpose doesn't apply. What, God has served his purpose and now he can disappear? So what then does the Gemara mean, according to that opinion, that mitzvahs will be canceled in the future, in the world to come? So the Rebbe explains, the word mitzvah, if you take it literally, means commandment, a tzivui. After Mashiach comes and after the resurrection of the dead, we won't need to be told. There will be no need for a tzivui. But of course, we're going to keep Shabbos, we're going to put on tefillin. But without being commanded. So the literal, precise meaning of the mitzvah is going to be canceled means the instruction. Now a mitzvah is called a mitzvah because we don't know what God wants. He has to tell us. When he tells us, that's called a mitzvah. But if we were literally on the same page with him, why wouldn't we know what we need to do, what we should do, without being told? If the separation between us is removed, we won't have to be told. Like an elderly couple who have been married for 70 years, they don't have to tell each other. They know. They've merged their thinking and their needs and their moods so that they don't have to tell. But not because they no longer want to communicate, it's because they can communicate much more efficiently without using words. I had a complaint from some listener who was a pretty knowledgeable student of Torah. He would consider himself Talmud Chacham. But he had a problem. He doesn't understand how we can be dismissive of reward and punishment, particularly the punishment of hell, Gehenna. And if I remember his words correctly, he says, if there is no punishment and hell is not frightening, then why would we do any of the mitzvahs? I don't know how you can study Torah and come away with that conclusion. It's embarrassing, actually. Were it not for punishment, you wouldn't do any mitzvahs. I actually had an interesting experience. There was this girl in Minnesota who in the 70s got caught up in a Christian cult. Her parents were survivors. And she came home from this cult someplace in the deep South. And she told her parents that she knows why there was a Holocaust. Anyway, the mother begged me to talk to her. I knew it would be fruitless because when they're brainwashed, there's nobody to talk to. And it would just end up in an argument. It would just become nasty. But the mother was so desperate, I agreed to talk to her. She came to the Chabad house. I asked her, do you keep kosher? She says, I don't have to keep kosher. You see, he died for our sins. So now we can get to heaven without keeping kosher. I said, I know. I'm just curious. Do you keep kosher? So she explained it again. There was a time when you needed to keep the laws in order to get to heaven. But since he died for our sins, now we can get to heaven on grace. We don't need to keep kosher. I said, I understand. I'm just curious. Do you keep kosher? So she started explaining it a third time. I said, no, wait a minute. I heard what you said and I understand what you said. But you look like somebody who loves God. So I'm just curious whether you're keeping kosher just for him, even though you don't have to. She got terribly flustered. She ran out of the room, went to the public phone, called somebody, came back 15 minutes later, and she said, no, I'm not supposed to keep kosher, because if I keep kosher, it's like I'm suggesting that I don't trust him to get me into heaven. Profound. Anyway, it went downhill from there. We just got into it. When she got home, I called her mother. I said, so what did your daughter tell you about our meeting? The mother said, she just keeps mumbling about why I don't keep kosher. it really got to her. And whatever answer she was given by her mentor or something didn't resolve the problem. Why wouldn't you keep kosher when you read in the Bible that God considers certain animals abominations? So even if you could get to heaven without it, why wouldn't you do it just for him? Basically, I was asking her, why are you Christian? Why aren't you Jewish? Because Jewish means you do a mitzvah for him. Christian means you do it to get to heaven. So a Jew who says, without heaven and without fear of hell, why would I do a mitzvah? Sounds a little Christian. What is the very question itself? Why should I do a mitzvah? That's like saying, I'm married to the woman. Why do I have to be nice to her? What are you asking? What is that question? Everything is so twisted, and they don't see it. So it all begins with the assumption that since God is so perfect, he doesn't need anything. So the reason for doing the mitzvah must mean your benefit. It's all for your benefit since he doesn't need anything at all. Well, if it's for my benefit, tell me what I win at the, what do I get at the end? Or what do I avoid and protect myself from by keeping the mitzvahs? Take that away, I have no reason to do the mitzvah. Because if I don't need it, and he certainly doesn't need it, well, what am I left with? So when we say that the Torah preceded creation, what we're saying is the Torah is him, not something he created or thought up or concocted. It's him. Well, can he be any other way? Is it possible for God to not want mitzvahs? To not care about Shabbos? To not care about kosher? Is it possible? A childish answer is, yeah, God can do anything. He can change his mind. Of course, he can change his mind, but he can't stop being God. And the mitzvah is him. That's why Rambam says we have to believe with perfect faith that the Torah will never change, meaning that he will never change the Torah. Where do we get that from? Why do you care if he changes the Torah? If God comes along and says, I've needed you to put on tefillin for 5,780 years, but no more. Change my mind. Now I need you to do something else. Rambam says that can't be. But why not? God can do anything. It's childish. It's immature. My God can beat up your God. What do you mean God can do anything? In this view, God really means very little. He can do anything, he can choose anything, he can, nothing is fixed, nothing is real, nothing is solid. He's not real. He's this unknowable do everything thing. What kind of, so can God change the mitzvahs? The answer is no. Oh, but he can do anything. Well, there's one thing he can't do. He can't not be God. And that's not a handicap. That's not an imperfection. He can't not be God because God is God. It's true, it's real, it's solid, it's fixed. He is what he is, and he'll always be what he is. What is he? Shabbos, tefillin, matzah. That's him. So it cannot change. There's one opinion of the Gemara that I think it's Rabbi Yochanan, who says that you're allowed to bury a Jew in shatnez, in a garment that is a mixture of wool and linen, which you're not allowed to wear when you're alive. But when you're burying a person, you can bury him in shatnez. The question is then asked, but when he gets resurrected, he will be resurrected in his clothing, and then he'll be wearing shatnez. So this opinion in the Gemara says, okay, you see, after the resurrection, the mitzvahs won't be valid anymore, won't be in force. You'll be allowed to wear shatnez. But the Rebbe explains, it can't be. Every mitzvah is absolutely eternal, including the prohibitions. So it can't be that you will be allowed to wear shatnez. Here's how the Rebbe explains it. After the resurrection, the world will be completely godly. Nature will have become godly. Nature itself will object to a sin. Like in another place, the Gemara says that after Mashiach comes, when a person will reach up to pluck a fruit from a tree on Shabbos, the tree will say, no, it's Shabbos. Nature will demand mitzvahs. That's called a fixed world. So what's going to happen when a person is resurrected wearing shatnez? Nature will not tolerate it and will change the shatnez into non-shatnez. Because nature won't tolerate the sin. So even according to the opinion that you're allowed to bury a person in shatnez, it's not because he'll be allowed to wear it. It's because nature will correct it, because nature won't tolerate sin. It makes many parts of Torah a little more understandable and more meaningful. If it were possible that a mitzvah could be canceled eventually in the future, then how important is it in this world for the future. If it is cancelable, then how seriously do we need to take it? Why would there be a mitzvah to give up your life rather than violate the 3 commandments? Give up your life? Hey, you're getting a little too serious here. You're giving up your life for something that's going to be canceled soon anyway? Also, if the mitzvah is there only for my benefit, how does it benefit me to die? Everything becomes murky. Nothing hangs together. The Mishnah says, do not do the mitzvah for the reward. But wait a minute. What other reason is there? So they come to the sad conclusion. What the Mishnah means is, make believe you're not doing it for the reward. Act as if the reward is not important to you, but of course it is. It's the only reason to do the mitzvah. Makes a mockery of the Torah. What do you think? Are you unmuted? Ian? Ilan? Are you unmuted or you're muted? You can't talk, okay. Our host left his post. So what we talked about this afternoon is the principle of the Rambam, HaTorah hazos lo tehei muchlefes. The Torah will never be exchanged for another, which means by God. God will never change the Torah. Why do we need to know this? What do we care if he does change the Torah? Because if you think he can change the Torah, you have no idea what the Torah is. If you think that a mitzvah can be canceled, you don't know what a mitzvah is. That's pretty serious. So why does the Torah tell us there's reward and punishment? And this is a valid question just in the face of the Mishnah that says you shouldn't do it for the reward. If I shouldn't do it for the reward, why do you tell me over and over and over? If you do this, you'll get good. If you do that, you'll be punished. Why do you keep telling me what the reward and the punishment are if I'm not supposed to do it for those reasons? To make it even more puzzling, further on in Pirkei Avos, in the first chapter of Pirkei Avos, it says, don't do the mitzvah for the reward. But look through the other 5 chapters. How many times is reward mentioned? Consider the reward of mitzvah against its loss, and consider the reward of sin against its loss. Because God is your employer, you can be confident that he will pay you. Also, according to the pain is the reward. But he keeps saying, you just told me not to think about the reward. So there is reward and punishment, and yet we're not supposed to be motivated by that to do mitzvahs. So what is the point of reward and punishment? So you know that there's a commandment in the Torah concerning a soldier at war who finds a woman captive very appealing. There's a whole set of laws. He has to take her home, and she has to mourn her parents, and she has to convert. And the explanation for that mitzvah is in the Gemara and Rashi. During the war, when your blood is hot, you find it hard to control yourself. So the Torah is taking into consideration your Yetzer Hara. And in face of such a Yetzer Hara, they make this seeming compromise that you can take her home, but you have to convert her. So you see that the Torah will sometimes instruct the Jew on how to deal with his Yetzer Hara. Reward and punishment is a response to the Yetzer Hara. Your human soul that does not really appreciate godly concepts will be asking you, why are you doing this? Or why can't you do this? And to explain all the holy reasons, your animal soul, your Yetzer Hara, is not going to get it. So to appease your Yetzer Hara, God says there's something in it for you. Now that your Yetzer Hara is satisfied, can we talk about what's really real? That's one explanation. A deeper explanation is God never meant reward and punishment to be a motivating factor. The reward and the punishment is simply a description of the mitzvah. It's part of the description of the mitzvah. This mitzvah affects you in this world and in the world to come. This mitzvah brings peace to the world. This mitzvah makes you more sensitive. You wear tzitzis, you'll remember. Like we celebrate Pesach to remember that we came out of Egypt. So if a person doesn't keep Pesach, what is he violating? The memory or God? He's violating God because God asked you to keep Pesach. What about the reason? The reason just tells you what Pesach is. That's not why you should do it. Observe the 7 days of Pesach or the 8 days of Pesach so you will remember. I don't care to remember. So that's not a good reason for me to do it. God says that was never meant to be a reason. You have to celebrate Pesach in such a way that you remember. That's how you do the mitzvah. That's not why you do a mitzvah. You do a mitzvah because it's important to God. Because otherwise, yes. Why does God want me to keep Pesach? Oh, so that you should remember coming out of Egypt. You've simply moved the question. You haven't answered it. Why does he want me to remember coming out of Egypt? Even the statement that the mitzvahs were given so that you will become a mensch, to make a mensch out of you. Yeah? God needs me to be a mensch? So you haven't answered the question. You've just changed it. I'm wondering why God tells me to be a mensch. I'm sorry. I'm wondering why God tells me to do a mitzvah. You say to be a mensch. And so now my question is, why does he care if I'm a mensch or not? It's not like we're going to marry into his family or anything. It's not a shidduch crisis. So these are, like the Rambam says, the fundamental principles of Yiddishkeit. How did we stray so far from that? That the only reason to do a mitzvah is because of reward and punishment. God doesn't need anything. How did we get so assimilated? How did Judaism become so Christianized? It's not a big mystery, by the way. You live in Christian countries for 2,000 years, you get pretty Christianized. So, a very profound story. When the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, resisted the Tsar's decrees, he tried to tamper with Yiddishkeit, with rabbinics, and the Tzemach Tzedek fought him. So he was interrogated a lot. He was imprisoned a lot. One time, the minister presented a question to him that was unexpected. The minister of education, I think it was, said to him, Judaism has been around for 3,000 years without Hasidic teachings. Why all of a sudden do you need Hasidic teachings? Must be a political movement. Because it's not necessary for Judaism. Here was the Tzemach Tzedek's answer. He said, the Torah is like water. Without it, there's no life. It's essential to life. Water can never be contaminated. Water can't be spoiled. You can put contaminants into the water. So when we say a contaminated river, we don't mean the water is contaminated. We mean that there's a lot of contaminants in the water. So when water is contaminated, what do? You put it in a pot, and you put the pot over a fire. The fire burns off the toxins or the contaminants, and then the water is pure water like it always was. The water hasn't changed. Same is true with Torah. Torah can't be ruined, it can't be spoiled, it can't be toxic. But with time, toxins accumulate in the water. And the solution is to put the water over a fire. Hasidic teachings are the fire that burn off the toxins that are in the water. In other words, Hasidus brings Judaism back to its pure, unaffected, original sense. Before Hasidus, there were other movements or other aspects of Torah that were meant to clean up the damage, to bring Judaism back to its proper understanding and function and so on. The Musar movement. The Rambam's Guide to the Perplexed. Judaism was veering off on some tangent, and it needed to be brought back. In our times, it was Hasidus. 2,000 years of damage needed to be cleaned up. In the Muslim world, there was 1,000 years of damage. Like the Muslim or Islamic attitude towards women. It rubbed off on the Jewish communities. That's another complaint that this person has. He says, since when is it kosher for a Jewish married woman to wear a beautiful, or what he calls gorgeous, wig? Not allowed, it's not modest. So she's covering her hair to be modest, but she's using a gorgeous wig? That defeats the purpose, doesn't it? And when I explain, the purpose is not to hide beauty, the purpose is to keep the intimate private. Beauty is not private. There's nothing wrong with being beautiful. In fact, the Torah goes out of its way to mention how beautiful Sarah was, and Esther, and Rachel, and Chava. There's nothing private about beauty. Modesty doesn't hide your beauty. It hides the sensual, not the beautiful. This guy comes along and quotes Gemara that says that the women who prance around trying to seduce young men are evil. What does that have to do with anything? Of course. If your intention is to seduce, then it's evil. Not because it's beautiful, but because it's seductive. No, he believes women should be ugly because they're too tempting. That's so Islamic. It's very sad. So I'm glad we cleared that up. Now we got that out of the way. But that explanation of the Tzemach Tzedek about what Hasidus does is very profound. The minister, by the way, in the end of the story, the minister was completely beguiled, and his assumption that it was a political movement was gone forever. He realized it's a very profound philosophy of life. Not a revolution against the Tsar. Anyway, I don't know how to unmute you. And Israel is here, but I can't see him. No camera, Yisrael. Yes, he's muted too. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. And we will meet again next week. Kamir Tzashem. Only good news.
Thank you very much.
Ah, there you are.
Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos.
That was